Over the past 6 months, I have been working on a faithful remake of LEGO Loco, a classic sandbox city builder from 1998. Throughout this series, I've built up this game from an idea for a personal project to a complete remake of the iconic game. And as the year is coming to an end, I thought I'd recap the entire process so far and maybe give you a sneak peek into what is still to come. But without further ado, let's get straight into it. So this whole project began about 7 months ago, when I had the idea to remake a small part of the gameplay using some of the assets from the game, and got to researching exactly how I would extract the files from the game. I stumbled upon the Rock Raiders United forums, and the project immediately became a reality. Using a Python script I got from the forums, I got most of the game files sorted, and then after finding an updated version of that extractor, I had all of LEGO Loco's assets ready to use. So, from a simple idea of what a cool video might be, I was off remaking LEGO Loco in Unity. The first main mechanic I worked on was the grid-based building system, complete with the drag feature to place buildings as you go. I wrote a simple function to load the size of the building from the sprite and check the overlapped area to see if the building could be placed. At this point, I was just choosing what building was selected from the inspector. So once I was happy with how the buildings worked, I made the initial version of the toy box. The toy box in the game is where you can select different buildings, decorations and tracks to place down, as well as where you find the eraser, the bomb to clear the city, a few basic settings and the save menu. The way the toy box works in the original is that the buttons are baked into the sprite, and when the case fully opens, the interactable buttons appear on top, creating a seamless design. At this stage in the development, I was struggling with the UI elements because I didn't have the sprites for any of them. So instead, I cut them out of the toy box sprite instead, which added more work and meant that it didn't look as good as the original. The reason I didn't have the sprites is because all of the button sprites were in a different format that the game uses, .but. And while I assumed it was more metadata type files, Geeze over on my Patreon told me that these are literally image files and I could just change the file type to PNG and they're ready to use. I eventually went back and replaced all of these, but for a while I was using the dodgy buttons I remade. The core functionality of the toy box was very easy to implement, because like I said before, it's kind of a terrible menu. I set up some scriptable objects for every single building in the game, and then made the menus to select everything. I created these scrolling menus that allow you to select your building type, and with that, already had a good amount of the basic gameplay in place. You could technically play this and build a city, but obviously it was very empty, and I had plenty of work left at this stage. After adding a few extras, like some of the building's alternate designs, I built my first map, a remake of the original's Cowville, and that was the end of the first devlog for this project. And it was around this stage in the development where I realised that I didn't just want to make a playable slice of the game, but instead a fully fleshed out, faithful remake of LEGO Loco. So I got to work planning and developing every feature that I had left to make. The next step was to get all the minifigs in the game. This is one of my favourite parts of the original, placing down all of the buildings and seeing which minifigs appear. I went through all of their sprites, sliced them all correctly, and got to work setting up the base object that every minifig uses. This is the generic prefab that's spawned in and then set up with specific data and has things like a sprite renderer, pathfinding logic, an animator, that kind of stuff. That's then combined with the data from scriptable objects for each minifig. In here, I stored the data for things like their type of minifig, their sprites, a list of their detailed and spec sprites, an animation override controller, and a list of possible names they can spawn in. Originally, I copied over a few names from the original, like Eamon the Skeleton, but to make the project a little unique and bring the audience into it, I asked for name suggestions from everyone on YouTube and Patreon and added over 200 names to the different types of minifigs. With all this in place, every time the object manager tries to spawn a minifig, it picks a random building and spawns in one of its possible minifigs. So the police officers come out of the station, the doctor comes out of the hospital, and so on. So you're inclined to build as many varieties of buildings to collect all sorts of characters. Once the minifigs were in, I also took a look at the animals and cars in the game. These work in basically the same way, spawning from their fields and garages, and travel around the city just like the minifigs. The animals use the same pathfinding and everything, but the cars obviously had to be tweaked to drive along the roads instead of the pavements. I set up the prefabs and scriptable objects, got them spawning, and watched as they wandered about the place. I don't know why, but one of the things that I remember the most from this game is the duck. Just look at this little guy. Once all of these characters were in the game, I got to work adding in some of the details to the buildings, like the animations that play. I started with the factory and got the idle animation playing in the game so that it looked more lively. I then set up the fountains clips, but never actually hooked them up in the game, and sort of left this feature for about 5 devlogs. Not exactly sure why I did that, but I guess I just got distracted by something else and completely forgot about it. Well, I eventually went back and got them all in the game anyway. Around this time, I also added the random encounters in the game, where different things fly past the screen, like a plane carrying a banner, some birds, a UFO, all sorts. How I set it up in game was pretty simple. I just created an object that moves from one side of the screen to the other, and changed the animation controller every time it reached one end, making it look like different objects were flying across. I added some triggers to the animations for things like the UFO, which stops every so often to drop off the alien for a quick visit before flying off again. So after 3 devlogs and about 2 months of progress, I had a pretty functional game with a lot of features, but was still far from completion. In August, I finally got around to adding the menu to the game, making it feel more complete instantly. I set up the simple looking screen, cleaned up some of the weird 90s elements to the sprites, and even with such a simple menu in place, the game felt so much more complete. I even set up the amazing loading screen, just this little guy signaling for you to proceed into the game, whistling away. If I had to judge loading screens in games, this is definitely top 3. With the menu in place, I was able to switch scenes and got to work on the main game some more. The next step was to get the features in for the eraser, undo button, and bomb. To start this off, I added colliders to each building so that I could actually click on them, and then worked on the logic for the undo queue. Basically how it works is instead of outright deleting a building anytime it's erased, it instead disables it and stores an undo action into a queue. That's then reverted if the undo button is pressed. The queue only stores 10 possible actions, but using the bomb only counts as a single action, so you can completely undo using that. Alongside these actions, I also worked on the background selection screen, where you can swap the background sprites with one of the classic styles in the game, as well as a new one I added, just for fun. All of these UI trays are handled by simply disabling any active menu set as a child and then enabling the one set to open. What was nice about getting this menu working, including an easy scrolling list class I made, was that it's basically the exact same design as the save load menu, so I could just reuse basically all of it again when I actually get that working. More on that later. At this point in the development, the game had absolutely zero audio in place. So I started by designing a super basic audio player system that stores clips with easy to use strings so I could reference each clip by name. The first thing that got this in place was the random encounters flying about. So when the plane flies by, you can hear its engine or hear the geese honking away as they pass by. I also got the iconic whistling in place for the loading screen station master, so he no longer has to sit in silence. I'm just going to say again how much I love this screen. But that was basically it for the audio until I finally got around to adding the rest of it, like 2 months later, but I get to that. In September, my biggest focus was everything to do with the inspector in the game, whereby you can right click on all of the units and buildings in the game, which brings up a details panel as well as a magnifying glass to get a better look. I set up a new inspector object with both of these features as children that can be enabled and disabled independently. The magnifying glass was a fun feature to set up, as it's made up of a UI element, there's a few buttons on it, a secondary camera that moves around in world space following the current target, and a render texture that displays everything this camera sees positioned inside the magnifying glass. The magnifying glass also moves around by converting the target's world space into screen space, and this all blends together nicely to create the effect of magnifying whatever it is that you're looking at. The inspector window was pretty easy to set up, with a nice image of whatever it is you're looking at, a name at the top which can be changed if it's a minifig, and some basic buttons. Adding this was a big step for the overall gameplay, as a lot of the interactability uses this window, and by spawning a whole bunch of minifigs and animals into a city, I could jump around and see everyone wandering about. Most of the buildings in the game use the standard inspector, however there's a few that are a bit different. The first one I worked on was the train depot, setting up all of the different menus and options in there, except at this point I still didn't know about the extra UI sprites hidden in the files, so it looked like absolute trash, but at least it sort of worked. And with that in place, I finally started to work on the trains, and this was one of the most painful parts of development. I've never made anything like it before, and had to work out a nice way to get the train cars moving as a single unit, but with independent rotation when going around the corners. I tried a whole bunch of different methods, but eventually settled on one that works pretty well, where each car has its own pathfinding code, but they all move at the same speed and stop all at once so they stay in sync with each other. This actually worked really well with my grid system, and the trains were finally moving around the tracks in the city and looked really nice. I did lower the frame rate on the turning animations because it's kind of weird that the trains have super smooth rotation when nothing else does, but to be honest, it was just a lot easier to deal with fewer sprites. I may still go back and change this, but who knows at this point. The biggest problem with the trains is I kept having a super weird bug which would literally crash the engine every time it happened. When the trains were going around the track, at seemingly random intervals, whether they were going around a corner or on a straight or just sitting still, it would cause an infinite loop somewhere and brick the game. I'm actually not sure if this bug still persists in the game. I've had a few successful playthroughs without it, but I'll have to do some more testing before the project is officially complete. With this in place, I set up the depot to spawn them in, and that was the train episode, which up until this point is the most watched episode and has the most viewed short based on it. So clearly, people like trains. In November, devlog number 7's main focus was the building interiors in the game. For the painter, post office and library, instead of simply inspecting the building with the magnifying glass like everything else, you enter their respective building menus, which are all focused around the postcard system in the game. This was one of my favourites back in the day, where you can design your own postcards with a whole bunch of LEGO clip art and send them off to either your friends, or more likely, the NPCs in the game, or save them in the album book to look back on. These menus are really interesting in game because while they look 3D, they're made up of single images for the background, with all of the buttons placed on top. I created buttons with the sprite swap interactions for each element and lined them up the best I could using their anchors, so they would stay in place and scale together with the background if you resize the game. The only really detailed part of these screens is the painter's conveyor belt, which I animated by sliding the UV rect values on the texture and created two sets of objects for the incoming and outgoing sprites. They simply slide along in time with the conveyor belt, and it looks like the items are moving along the belt just like in the original. I set up the buttons to control it by sliding left to right, and it was all done. Once I had the post office and painter screens all set up, I got to work making the postcard creator. For all of the clip art assets, I wrote a Python script to remove the pink backgrounds and reformat them into PNGs with transparency, and then set up some scriptable objects to store them in, each broken down into respective categories. I set up the category switching, and the whole clip art system was complete. Then onto the postcard itself. I got the color selection in place for the background, which was a bit of a pain as the color mixing is done in RYB and not RGB, because it's more of a representation of mixing actual paint and not pixels in a game. This meant that I had to write a basic conversion function which was anything but I got it working nicely in the end. For the wheels, I had to create an extension of the button class as the regular one can't handle left and right presses or hold actions, so I had to code those in myself. And then came the clip art pieces. Every time you click on the canvas, it spawns in a new copy of that clip art, which can also be removed with the eraser. And then at the end, the whole canvas area is saved to a texture by simply snapping what the camera sees, and then that texture is stored in the postcard's data, ready to be displayed in the album book or post office. But I didn't actually have the album book made at that point, so I got to work building that out with the usual background sprite, a bunch of buttons, and a new prefab for the postcard object that has both a front and backside to display all the data. I had to make a few elements myself as I couldn't find them in the assets at all, but I think it looks pretty good, and you can flip through the pages and see all of your postcards that you've collected. And finally, I went through and added all of the little details to the game, with every single feature needing some sound effects, visual improvements, or both. So for example, all of the units and buildings needed their inspect sounds that play when you click on them, so I set up new audio clips for all of these, which trigger every single time you inspect them. For the buildings, animals, and cars, it was really easy because they only used a single sound. But for minifigs, I had to write a little extra function that takes into consideration their current mood and plays a clip based on this sound instead. The eraser feature now has a little particle effect trigger every time you delete a building, and the bomb has the classic sizzling sound when you press it. Overall, these little details made the entire project feel so much better and really brought together the last 6 months of work. And that is my remake of LEGO Loco. Almost. It's not 100% there yet, but it's looking like January may be the last month of development for it, which is crazy to say. The only key features that are not included in the game at all yet are the minifig controls, where you can tell them where to go, and the save system, which I put off until the end just so I had everything in place that would need saving before actually saving it. I'm hopeful that I can get these done next month, and then after a quick playtesting, have a project that is complete and ready to play. If you want to be notified as soon as the project is available, check out my Patreon page, as that's where I'll be posting an update first. It's completely free to follow, and there's a few extra bits from the project. Before I wrap up this video, I want to just quickly talk about the future of this project. As this is a remake of LEGO Loco, and I don't own the rights to this, obviously I can't upload this game to Steam or anything. I do plan to release the game, just like I've talked about before, but technically at any stage, LEGO can shut it down if they like. There are other LEGO projects that exist freely out there, like Manic Miners and Matt Casey's LEGO Island recompilation, that haven't run into issues, so I'm hoping that it's good to go, but I am aware of the possibilities. The first thing I'm going to do is have this project require the original game to run. It doesn't have to be installed, as the original doesn't run on Linux or macOS, but you will need the files for it. So you have to source these from an original CD or sites that provide downloads for old and abandoned projects. But I want something to release on Steam and really show off this project, which is why I'm going to be expanding the game into something new. I won't go into too much detail right now because this is still just a concept, but I want to branch this project into a new original game that shares the same essence as LEGO Loco. So if you're a digital artist and want to get involved in the project, send me a message. We'll see what we can make of it. But that's going to do it for today and this year. And as usual, for the last time this year, let's move over to Subscriber Wars. While they fight it out, I want to say thank you for the amazing support over the span of this project so far. It's been truly amazing to share my love for this game with all of you, and it's great reading comments where I've been able to remind people about this classic or share it with someone that's never seen the game before. I'm hoping to get this development wrapped up in the new year, ready to be enjoyed once more. I'm also looking to update Subscriber Wars because I think it's going to need a fresh new look, so let me know if you have any suggestions for that. But anyway, the subscribers are battling out here. Marlene S is controlling the middle of the zone, but there's competitors coming in from all sides. Who is going to come out on top? Valor, Yukan, and Johan all hovering around the edge. Yukan steps in and Marlene takes them down. It's Valor's turn now and they go down as well. Will we see a VIP actually win around here? Down to the last two, and Johan doesn't want to fight. They're just going to die to the zone. Marlene also steps out for some reason, and Johan goes down. Congratulations to Marlene S for winning this battle. You are the 2025 champion. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next year. Cheers.